I'm Benzie Johnson Jr. I'm enthusiastic about television, and Nickelodeon kicked butt in 2021. More new shows, more unusual ideas, and even a little bit of controversy for the drama club out there. And also a show called Drama Club, but I'll get to it. In case you missed it in this wild year of kids TV, let's head back through the good, the bad, and the slimy, and see how Nick made it happen in 2021. I didn't have faith in Brian Robbins at first when he took the helm at Nick. And then 2020 happened. And then 2020 on Nick happened. We got loads of new shows, an epic send-off to one of their longest-running sitcoms, if not a perfect one, and unexpected leadership when we needed it most. Nick came back into its own again in 2020, but could they keep up the good work in 2021? Let's start from the top, because if there's one thing Nick brought us in 2021, it's more new series. There were a double-digit number of new premieres this year, serving to further fill the channel's content slate to levels we haven't seen from them in years. First up was Tooned In on February 8th, a new trivia show where kids show off their Nick cartoon knowledge and outsmart their fellow contestants for a chance to win $1,000. It's a decent format, executed well enough. An animated AI robot as host is probably the most unusual touch here. Well, besides the fact that the questions aren't just, who's this guy? They'll answer that one soon enough. The whole roster of Nicktoons are up for grabs here. Not just Lincoln Loud and Spongebob, but also Avatar, Danny Phantom, and so on. Admittedly, per the credits, these kids have studied up on the old shows, so we're not watching a crop of 12-year-old future kids TV YouTubers here. But what we do have here is Nickelodeon acknowledging their history, on air, for the first time in a very long while. Generally, kids TV doesn't give much attention to anything outside their current roster. The core audiences cycle out way too often for shows more than a few years old to really matter. The kids watching Danger Force now were still watching Nick Jr. when Henry Danger premiered. Harvey Beaks, overly seen as underrated, lived and died on Nicktoons before some watching The Loud House today could even walk. It can feel cruel when a show that's just finished up is quickly forgotten, but for the most part, it's the nature of the business. Only Cartoon Network really seems to put in any effort to allude that a time before Gumball and Teen Titans Go being the schedule even existed, and even they've been slacking on that recently. No, Pibby doesn't count, that's Adult Swim. As the channel that literally sought to define what kids TV even is, Nickelodeon has an illustrious history that even more rearward-looking minds than I only tend to do partial justice. But it's only ever tried out in the context of the executives raiding the archives looking for a conceptually cheap reboot. Or a Nick Rewind, but let's face it, you're not watching it anyway because Retro does not rate, and so Nick gets to tarnish an ailing side channel with the rose-colored lip service for 7 hours a night. The main Nick channel, the one that everyone watches and cares about, doesn't really reflect on their past much, aside from keeping the old SpongeBob tapes circulating. And thus, the old SpongeBob discourse. Tooned In is really the first consistent public recognition of anything from the channel's past we've seen in a long time. It's worth noting, but it's not worth dwelling on. Speaking of Nickelodeon's past, Awesomeness TV continues to exist. The digital studio co-founded by Brian Robbins has gone from YouTube multi-channel network, back in the days where those words made sense, to victim of corporate hubris during the conglomerate's bankrolling web video bubble, to a bit player in the expanded media landscape since Viacom acquired them in the summer of 2018. Just before Robbins took control of Nickelodeon, the network he used to produce content for, including while at Awesomeness. This weird circular family tree begat its latest product in March of 2021, the mockumentary comedy Drama Club. The chronicle of the struggles of an overlooked and underfunded Midwestern middle school theater troupe was a creative letdown when I reviewed it. While there were some execution bright spots, the concept struggled to be comedic or clever. The strongly trope-centric ensemble was a good jumping-off point, but it didn't seem to do much of anything all that well with them. And also starred Nathan Janak, who is also part of Robbins' other pet project, the All That reboot, further serving to prove the only thing that has closure ties in this is an Alabama wedding. While Drama Club was creatively lackluster, it still seemed to faithfully fill out a role as a middling ratings performer on Nick's slate throughout the spring. Though 228,000 and 153,000 viewers for its doubled-up finale capping off a week premiere night suggests that the curtain call came none too soon. On April 2nd, Nick kept the new series premieres up with the adventurous puppet comedy The Barbarian and the Troll, regaling us with the adventures of a fierce warrior and the spirited troll who follows her. I missed this one the first time around, admittedly, but puppetry is a rarity outside of preschool fare, so it's an ambitious ploy for Nick to make. The show feels like it could go places, but it's a bit too outwardly functional for my palate. Some of the creative bright spots, like the contrast of the blunt dialogue with a fantastical setting and literally burning a bridge as symbolism for our troll, get drowned out by how strung along the plot progression feels. The start of the Barbarian and the Troll doesn't necessarily feel rushed, but it places well-worn tropes in a bit of a bare-bones container and doesn't really do much to stretch beyond that, which made a struggle to stay interested in. The usage and quirks of puppetry bring a certain added charm to the show that no other method could muster, and that's something I can appreciate. Even if the tale doesn't go anywhere beyond its 13 episodes, The Barbarian and the Troll can at least go down as another example of Nick taking on a concept that does things a little differently than you might expect from kids' TV, which is hard not to like in this age of cash grab reboots and safe programming decisions. SpongeBob SquarePants is probably not a show most of the kids' TV space at large pays careful attention to anymore. Unless you do, in which case you relentlessly obsess over it, ready to serve up hour-long dissections of any given frame at a moment's notice. The show has been through some ups and downs over the past few years, between the passing of the show's creator, Stephen Hillenburg, and the celebration of 2 decades as a juggernaut that wrapped up last year. Heading into 2021, however, one ever-present word was on the minds of the sponge space: spin-offs. It was only a matter of time before the executives at Viacom CBS got to SpongeBob, admittedly, and this has all long been in development. Yet when we finally got a look at the new products of corporate cash grabbing, SpongeBob fanatics still found it within themselves to misinterpret a quote from the late series creator to bash both Kamp, Koral, SpongeBob's Underyears and The Patrick Star Show as canonically illegitimate creations. In particular, Pie Guy Rules, one of the most prolific SpongeBob content creators, worked himself into such a tizzy over how creatively bankrupt the spin-offs supposedly were that he went on a lengthy crusade to find an answer to whether Stephen Hillenburg was on board with any of this. To quote Pie in January before Kamp Koral launched, "Anything less than Steve specifically loving this spin-off idea is disrespectful in my eyes." Pie Guy then proceeded to devote nearly an entire week in search of an answer from Nick or someone on the show, forcing a crew member to come out and make a statement that Stephen was part of the development process for the series. Other tweets from this crew member suggest it was a fraught time at this stage in the process, and that Pie coaxing the answer out of him was tantamount to harassment, something that is supposedly frowned upon in the modern kids' TV community. Somehow not satisfied by his coerced confession, once promos for the Patrick Star Show started coming out, Pie Guy decided to rail about SpongeBob spin-offs again, repeating many of the same arguments he tried out just 3 months earlier about Kamp Koral, and even more egregiously, attempting to claim that the forced statement he wrung out of the Kamp Koral crew somehow doesn't apply to the Patrick Star Show or any other SpongeBob spin-off project. Simultaneously, alongside all of this, and throughout the cycle of attention both spin-offs received, Pie Guy lamented the state of the discourse surrounding Kamp Koral, asking SpongeBob fans to be nice and not harass the creatives about it. Seriously? You can't have your pie and eat it too, dude. You can't make platitudes about not harassing the crew and then spend nearly a week harassing the crew yourself. This kind of hypocrisy runs rife in the cartoon community, and it really shows the truth of what many in this space want. You can't ask for higher levels of nuanced discourse and at the same time do everything in your power to destroy any possibility of that discourse. And then you wonder why we keep fighting the same baseless arguments about Cal art style and modern cartoons, because that's all you want to care about. Either actually work to raise the level of discussion in the animation and kids' TV spaces, or stop pretending like you want better discussions at all. Because this rampant pattern of saying one thing and doing something else is disgusting. And it's even the norm among top creators and handles like Pie Guy Rules. People who have real influence in this space, and as shepherds of powerful audiences, should know better, and further, be doing better. It is hypocrisy like this that is killing any chance of raising discussion and discourse about animation out of the low-quality, base-level ghetto it was born into thanks to the likes of bad faith creators such as Mr. Enter and other early reviewers. The worst part about all of this is that it showcased in a very public way something that is also unfortunately very prevalent in the animation and kids TV communities. a fundamental misunderstanding about how much of the behind-the-scenes action in television works. As I illustrated in my longer video about the Kamp Koral controversies, projects are generally developed a good 2 years or more before they're broadcast, which makes it entirely plausible that Stephen Hillenburg had at least some awareness or involvement in the early stages of development for both of these shows before his passing. In fact, according to reporting in WorldScreen, Kamp Koral was among a number of ideas proposed to Brian Robbins in one of his first days heading Nickelodeon, back in October 2018, the month before Hillenburg's passing. We will likely never know a more definitive answer than that though, as dead men tell no tales, Nick probably doesn't see a reason to bring it up corporately, and if that period was so fraught, other crew members might not be interested in giving their own secondhand testimonies, especially if they're going to be hounded in the same way Pie Guy pulled off here. If you're going to opine on the TV show development process, take the time to learn a little about it before you discuss it. If I feel pressured to treat 90s and 2000s shows as holy scripture like a lot of other people in the cartoon community do, then maybe you should learn a thing or two about how the creative side of the shows you love so much works. But that's a discussion for a whole nother day. I haven't even answered as to whether all this hand-wringing by SpongeBob fanatics was even worth it. For Pie Guy's sake, I hope it was. He swore off any further SpongeBob content after this fiasco, but if this is the kind of approach he's taking to animation, I'm not sure if I even want to see it applied to anything else. The first of the 2 SpongeBob spin-offs unleashed this year was Kamp Koral, SpongeBob's Underyears, back in the spring. The show reimagines the Bikini Bomb bunch as eager youngsters at summer camp, with a new 3D CGI art style that looked a little half-baked to some at first. I think it looks just fine in the final product though, to be honest. The show's early minutes seemed preoccupied with hitting a variety of memorable scenes and moments from the main show, and it detracted a little bit from establishing the concept for me. The rest of what I watched seemed to be alright, no glaring failures, but no stunning successes either. Maybe I need to be way more invested into SpongeBob than I am to appreciate, or deride it, but I don't really feel that it sets itself up distinctively enough to justify its existence, which, in my eyes, is something of a death knell for a spin-off. It comes off as a little too safe, as much as that's probably what the executives were hoping for to keep the exact kind of ire the likes of Pie Guy were eager to lob at bay. In the context of some of Nick's other spin-offs from recent years, at least it's not wholly reliant on its parent show for creative sustenance, like the Casagrandes was, but it also fails to take the show into a new direction in a unique enough way to be interesting all on its own, in the way that The Adventures of Kid Danger wanted to, the messiest period of the live-action show taken to a wacky, absurdist conclusion, or that Danger Force does, keeping the sensibilities of the later end of the main show but meaningfully breaking from it with new characters and situations. Given it's SpongeBob though, Kamp Koral can rate like nobody's business. The first episode in April attracted 714,000 viewers and regularly got near or past 400,000 viewers throughout the fall. It was renewed for a second season in August, so we'll be seeing plenty more activities from this camp. Second in line came The Patrick Star Show, hitting the stage on July 9th and illustrating assorted adventures as Patrick puts on a talk show with the help of his family. The show takes one familiar character and crafts a whole world of surrealism around him, as mildly tethered to narrative and sense as the lovably bumbling sea star himself. It seems to threaten almost being too childish in its sensibilities, as if it were to knock on Nick Jr.'s door, but it never actually arrives, much to our benefit. Boasting zany, spur-of-the-moment segments, topsy-turvy plot building, and almost a simulacra of a classic sitcom family for an ensemble cast, The Patrick Star Show excels best not as a spin-off of SpongeBob, though you'll get plenty of reminders it's that too. Rather, it's a showcase of a maximalist interpretation of suspension of disbelief as told through vaguely familiar surroundings. It succeeds in its attempts to give some substance to what goes on in Patrick's head and life, beyond what 2-second empty-headed gags in the main show might offer in that respect. Actually building that in a faithful and coherent way was its own challenge, and the jury is still out as to whether SpongeBob obsessives will let the show exist for more than a season or two. And personally, it's not something I'm racing in to watch on Friday evenings. It's a fun watch, but not one high on my list, especially given my lack of personal and emotional investment into the continued existence of SpongeBob as a franchise. But it could have gone much worse. And if we are going to have spin-offs mired in discourse, we can at least have them be shows that do a good job of speaking up for themselves. Thankfully, the discourse didn't drown out everything that happened on Nick, because if there's one thing that's been constant this decade so far, It's that Nick knows how to deliver. Literally.
Let's get at it. Sorry, kiddo. I got carried away.
Middlemost Post premiered in July, keeping the flag flying high for episodic products, an underappreciated format these days. Sharing the exploits of a chipper former Raincloud working with a former sailor and his SEAL friend in community mail service, it took a minute for me to warm up to the series, particularly with so much riding on it as the lone original animated concept this year from Nick. But I soon came to love the show's fun and adventurous tales, with particular marks to the show's potential for promising world building. A plus, and conceptually convenient, but not necessarily a given. I don't think I've seen this much attention to background development on episodic since Breadwinners, and it really stretches out what the show is able to do in terms of story, and helps to establish longevity and future freshness for the show, irrespective of how Nick decides to handle it in the boardroom. The characters are well defined and uniquely memorable, the art direction looks great, and even the series' side characters get exposition you'll come to appreciate. As of the end of 2021, we've seen 10 of the 20 episodes so far, and the show's been pulling its own in terms of ratings, with most episodes in the 300 and 400,000s range. Middlemost Post hasn't been renewed yet, however, and word that at least one storyboarder has already left production on the show doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me. Given it's a Nick cartoon, not to mention an episodic, much of the kids' TV space has largely ignored it as well, which is disheartening as it is par for the course at this point. Given Middlemost Post was the lone, original new animated series, then we should also talk about the derivative ones. And boy did Nick have a big one this year, as Paramount Plus, in May, and Nick itself, later in August, pulled out a reboot of the 90s series Rugrats. Tommy, Chucky, and the rest of the gang were indeed back in a CGI rehash that was probably bound to come sooner or later. The original Rugrats is a show very close to my heart, as I watched a lot of the VHS tapes of it growing up. A reboot of the show was always going to be a tricky proposition for me to get on board with, both given my disdain for cash grab programming decisions like this, and my respect for the original. Any cynicism I may have had as to how the show turned out proved relatively unfounded, however. The new Rugrats manages to recapture some of the whimsy of the original while amplifying the show's sense of adventure and updating the concept to grapple with modern parenting. The adults are recast fairly well, though Dee Dee came off as a bit neurotic to me, which I wasn't big on. The reinvention of Lou, perhaps the other major character change I noticed, works well. The rest of the continuity changes made to this version of the show go off without a hitch, and are executed casually and without fanfare. Many of them lean into and build on the archetypes the original concept plotted out, Angelica's mother Charlotte being in cushy local government, for instance. Aside from the move to CGI, it plays relatively safe in terms of art style and execution, though perhaps it's a little too insistent on hitting the right notes in regards to the kids' classic mannerisms. The pacing and storytelling were sturdy and enjoyable to watch. The progression of how we explore plot in Kids and Family Fare did spur the design of more expansive and immersive means to illustrate the baby's perspectives, which perhaps serves as the one main improvement to the original. The Rugrats reboot may be guilty of doing what you'd expect it to, but I think it does so pretty well, and audiences seem to agree. The one episode Nick got to see of it this year notched 420,000 viewers, and Paramount Plus has already renewed the show for a second season. For those who may be on the fence about it like I was, it's good entertainment that avoids most of the pitfalls that have often tended to come with reboots on kids' TV recently. There are some shows on TV that seem to largely exist as scheduling wallpaper. No one really knows why it came to be, no one really seems to watch it, no one really pays attention to the fact that it still exists. It just does for a while, and then it leaves just as quietly as it came in. Any entry into the Scooby-Doo franchise is one of these for me over on CN, but here on Nickelodeon you can make the case that the current Alvin and the Chipmunks series is such an example. An American-French co-production, it started in 2015, and somehow it continues, even though no one really seems to know when it's on or why. It's on season 5 now, for some inexplicable reason, and it's been renewed through at least a season 7. I legitimately thought it was shunted off to Nicktoons for reluctant contractual compliance or something a long time ago. But nope, it still airs on the main channel, and rates decently to boot too. On September 6th, 2021, entered what may be Nick's new background noise franchise, The Smurfs. Similarly European produced, though this time across the border in the miniature Blue Cruise home of Belgium, The new cartoon looks to turn the current state of the media franchise into something more lasting than just the 2 times a year one of the kids' TV channels picks up the various 2010s Smurfs movies. Those hopes may be out of reach, however. What I saw of it was a painfully generic cartoon that toyed with conventions but was content with sticking by them. European productions have managed to turn modest episodic ambitions into a unique strength in recent years, but surprisingly, it was this, a refresh of one of Europe's most famous illustrated franchises that ended up showing you could still, indeed, fail at the prospect. It's competent from an execution standpoint at least. There are no glaring errors or issues regarding story, art direction, or pacing, but I treat complacency as a bare minimum requirement, one of the most basic things a series should be able to do. As much as Cartoon Network has threatened that paradigm over the past couple of years, I have held firm on that principle. Just about anything can be competent, but a good show needs to do more than that. Skating by doesn't cut it. The creativity in the storytelling that is there is let down by the basic moralizing and stiff plot work. It wasn't so bad that I was bored enough to start picking out tropes, but I didn't find it engaging, and honestly, despite the potential for expansion in the forest, the show feels a little predictable once you watch a few episodes. I find it a shame, given I know Europe can do better, but I can't say much more than that the Smurfs is just background noise TV. Something that definitely should not be resigned to the background, however, is Nick's vibrant live-action sitcom That Girl Lele, which premiered on September 23rd. While it's an eponymous star vehicle like last year's Tyler Perry's Young Dylan, which I'll touch on again later, the show easily manages to strike its own identity through uniquely clever storytelling and the show's expressive star, who here plays the human personification of the self-affirmation app used by our other lead, Sadie, played by the All That reboot's Gabrielle Nevaeh-Green, as the two seek self-discovery while hijinks ensue.
I'm not dancing in front of those people. I'm rhythmically challenged.
You can't be afraid to take chances. That's what life's all about. I think. I don't really know. I'm new to this.
Back in my full review of the show, I couldn't help but point out just how much better this show executes compared to last year's Young Dylan, probably the closest structural neighbor. Telling a story that we haven't really seen before, particularly not in this way, definitely helps, but the show has plenty of other things going for it that make it feel not only fresh, but deeply relevant and relatable with audiences.
Your list is very specific.
And long. Let me continue. I want to prank call a convent. I want to play dress up. I want to eat cheese out of a can. Hey, how old do you have to be to work a bulldozer?
The show had a crossover with Young Dylan in November, but thankfully it was creatively taken on as a Lele episode, and it played out all the better for it. It also gave the show a welcome ratings bump, with the crossover's 487,000 viewers translating into ratings increases of about 50 to 100,000 viewers for the rest of the season that followed, the holiday episode season finale being the exception, though December on Nick has been a bit soft in general in recent years. The show's been renewed for a second season, set to arrive in summer 2022, and I am eager to see where That Girl Lele heads next. Back at Nick's 2019 upfronts, we caught wind of an untitled Simon Fuller Ryan Tedder project, pitched as a show set at a performing arts high school and poised to feature original music in every episode. Well, we found out that Nick ultimately decided not to go through with it, and they threw out the 1-hour pilot they filmed for it as a special called California Dreaming on December 16th. There's basically nothing about it online at the time of this video's production with regards to how it executed its story or anything like that, so I'm mostly knowing this for the sake of completeness. This is the second time Nick's thrown out an unusual thing like this in recent years. In July of 2020, they aired a baking show called Cake My Day after a rerun of the SpongeBob birthday special. I also asked then whether that was also some sort of failed pilot. I guess it's good that the work gets to be seen at the end of the day. Nickelodeon's long-running side fling with sports programming continued this year, managing to pull the vertically integrated corporate strings to snag some special content by way of CBS's rights deal with the NFL. This isn't the first time Nick's hooked up with football, and it certainly won't be the last, but 2021 focused specifically on the action. In January of 2021, Nickelodeon latched onto their corporate sibling CBS for a special simulcast of one of the NFL postseason wildcard games. Decked out in slime and all kinds of special effects, Gabrielle Nevaeh-Green, as aforementioned of That Girl Lele and the All That reboot, Lex Lumpkin, also of said reboot, and Nate Burleson, former football player turned TV personality, working with various Viacom CBS properties since 2017, guided viewers through the network's, and possibly viewers, very first football game, complete with clear explanations of the rules, plays, and scoring drives, and lots of appearances by Nick's more animated friends. And also young Sheldon, because corporate synergy. The game was a great getaway from the seriousness and daunting, almost gate-kept nature of traditional football coverage, especially postseason football, and was well received by audiences of all ages and knowledge levels as a fun, inviting, and inclusive twist on covering one of America's most beloved sports. But it wasn't entirely without issue, however. A hot mic and a referee caught a player drop a WTF bomb after a penalty, and there was some criticism about how the coverage seemed to underplay the risk of serious brain injury, a sore spot for the NFL even in its regular coverage, in one discussion. But if those minor dings are the only issues that came out of such a novel broadcast, I think it's safe to say they did a pretty good job, though it probably helps that they have a network with over 60 years of almost uninterrupted coverage experience behind them.
Are you ready, Nick Nation?
Cause we're about to turn these highlights into slime lights.
This is NFL Slime Time.
Yup.
Later in the year, with the start of the 2021-22 football season, Nick launched a weekly highlights show, NFL Slime Time. Hosted by young Dylan of Tyler Perry's His Eponymous Show, and Nate Burleson, as aforementioned in the wildcard game, the show did a relatively simple job in its Wednesday evening time slot. Look back on the previous week's NFL games and look forward to the upcoming action, with a few kid-centric and Nick-themed additions along the way, including a very intelligent young football analyst and none other than Lincoln Loud giving one player an award for the best performance of the week. As someone who doesn't watch football, this isn't something I'd actively watch, though it is interesting enough to keep me around until the first commercial break whenever it encores after new sitcom episodes. And speaking of those sitcoms, all 3 of Nick's 2020 live-action premieres continued into 2021. However, that means we still have to deal with Tyler Perry's I Can Do a Bad Sitcom All By Myself. I mean, Tyler Perry's Young Dylan. BET already has The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air at home, but ratings for the first season were more than good enough for Tyler to insist on a second. And those numbers continue to be competitive throughout the second season's run, hovering in the high 2 and low 300,000s, in step with where Nick rates in general these days. Chance the Rapper guest starred in a holiday episode, I imagine the same weird, missed it by that much kind of way they wheeled out DJ Khaled back in season 1. It's been renewed for season 3 already, so I guess I'll be wishing a little longer for it to just be over. A show I can't say that about, and in fact the one Nick show I can't get enough of these days, is Side Hustle, delayed by the pandemic but arriving in November 2020 in stellar form. Season 1 continued into 2021, and in October, Season 2 began. And in between them, we got 27 episodes worth of adventures in fictitious central Pennsylvania, as 3 friends try to repay their boat debt, one odd job at a time. Side Hustle continues to be quirky, fun, and every bit as lovable as a Make-A-Mutt, as the kids take on spoiled old friends, boring chemistry teachers, corrupt hot tub salesmen, karaoke slave labor, and a night milker. Those last 2 make more sense in context. Maybe. Some highlights of note include the episode Uncle Nedward, in which Terry Crews, father of Isaiah, who plays Munchie, guest stars as Munchie's motivational uncle, Make-A-Mutt, which happens to reference one of the most formative moments in television comedy from I Love Lucy, and the high-stakes cleverness of the episode Bot Club. But a funny thing happened as the episodes continued on, and as the later portion of Season 1 slipped into the start of Season 2. The show starts to focus a little less on the wacky gig work and a little more on the trio's other exploits. Fisher, Lex, and Jagged all find some kind of romance, everyone starts a band together for about 5 seconds, and there's a lot of development between Fisher and his dad. At first, I felt the show was starting to go astray, heading off kilter for no real reason, but eventually, especially as Season 2 started, I came to realize that these episodes were just as important, helping to give Side Hustle the heart and longevity it needs to last in the long run. Not every episode was going to focus on their odd jobs, but the way that they handled that exposition proved that they didn't have to still make a solid show. Side Hustle seems to rate relatively well, so I really look forward to seeing what they cook up in 2022. Similarly continuing this year is Danger Force, the spin-off of superhero sitcom juggernaut Henry Danger, whose challenged start in 2020 didn't seem to hurt them much. It was the highest rated live-action premiere by far for parts of 2021, racking up a high of 606,000 viewers over the winter, though it struggled mightily over the summer and fall. While I think it has hit something of a plateau creatively, Danger Force continues to be a strong show with clever concepts, hints of meta humor, and genuinely fun storytelling that both meets the moment without delving into over-exaggeration, and builds on an already vast universe largely established through its parent show. and they still know how to pull off massive storytelling events, with Season 2 beginning with a 4-part Among Us special in the fall. How they were going to convincingly pull off that reference as a story seemed sus at first, but they told a thrilling epic with aplomb in the spirit of the more recent portion of what is now the Dangerverse. But it wasn't all good news for Nick's returning shows. The network's animated slate has a long history of suffering under the weight of poor scheduling and even worse executive decisions, and unfortunately, that trend continued to devastating effect in 2021, impacting both of the promising new cartoons the channel premiered in 2020. Nickelodeon boosted their animated slate in April of 2020 with the premiere of Ollie's Pack, which proved to be everything I love about Canadian cartoons, but broadcast on American network, so maybe you'll get more than one season this time. Yeah, about that. As we left it in the 2020 retrospective, Ollie's Pack had just finished up the latest in a line of odd scheduling choices, with 2 episodes airing in mid-December garnering decent ratings, 416,000 and 595,000. That was the last we heard of the show for the next several months. Word of the Canadian cartoon about a boy and his friends keeping a handle on an interdimensional backpack wouldn't resurface again until May 3rd, 2021, where it was announced new episodes would be returning on Nicktoons, where many an animated series has died before it, and indeed after it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If that injustice was not enough, however, it would be revealed that these new episodes would be burnt off at 3:30 in the morning. A time so late that doesn't even count in the Nielsen ratings as the same day, as that day it cuts off at 3 a.m., when generally nothing of importance should be airing for hours either side of that time. This burn-off is quite literally the most heinous, despicable, and downright deplorable programming move that I have ever seen from any network, kids TV or otherwise, in nearly a decade of traveling the world of television. It is not only a low point for Nickelodeon, but it is a low point for the entire profession of television. And personally, as much as I don't like to mudsling about those that work in the business, I don't feel that the people involved in making that decision, the people involved in creating a new low for programming misconduct to sink to, should maintain their jobs. It shows not only disrespect, but flagrant disregard, and perhaps outright contempt for the massive investment a channel makes into the production and potential success of a television show. We don't even have numbers for how the show rated on this atrocious deathbed, but given Nicktoons' ratings averaged 67,000 viewers in 2021, it's likely that next to no one was watching. It's entirely possible that I was the only person in America who stayed up to watch these episodes. Ollie's Pack was 4 episodes away from finishing what would ultimately be its one and only season. 4 episodes. Sick Day, an episode likely delayed for pandemic-related obvious reasons, and 3 other episodes, including the show's double-length series finale in true CanCon fashion where only 1 season is ever guaranteed. The night the show aired that finale, May 6th, 2021, should go down in a terrifying infamy as the darkest day we've seen thus far for animated series, Nickelodeon fare, Canadian content, and the genre of kids television itself. It serves to reinforce the worst beliefs about the value of international creations and about the apathy that surrounds supporting the shows that air on Nickelodeon. I wrote a full video on the death of Ollie's Pack as it was happening, which I'll link in the description. Its pony, the tale of a rambunctious horse and the girl who loves him, ended up faring little better than the banished Ollie Allen. The show was renewed for a 2nd season in July 2020, but after a festive episode capped off season 1 in December 2020, all was silent as to when the new season would premiere. Nickelodeon fanboys grew particularly restless, and campaigns to support the show spun up online, the demise of Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the year prior still fresh on the minds of those who actively followed the network. Season 2 of Its Pony would begin with a Halloween episode on October 29th, 2021. But that episode would be doomed to a 9 p.m. time slot on Nicktoons. and that episode would garner only 22,000 viewers. The somewhat decent time slot, comparatively, is Cold Comfort, as over a decade of Nickelodeon scheduling practice has long affirmed that a send-off to Nicktoons is effectively a death sentence, no matter how much of the show is left to air. A second episode broadcast in December only did marginally better, hovering near 40,000. Even though the rest of the season will air in 2022, the damage has already been done. One of the more unusual parts of Nick's adaptation to an unusual 2020 was the premiere of Unfiltered, a fun game of guessing hidden celebrities that could easily be produced from home while the rest of the channel's live-action ambitions were sidelined. A second season of the show aired throughout 2021, but in the context of a slow return to the social interactions we weren't able to have during lockdown, the concept of a show like this takes on a different context. In Season 2, Unfiltered had changed. No longer just something they had to make, but something worth wanting to watch. As much as I hate the term because it's wildly inaccurate for where we are right now, this run of episodes showcased the beginnings of an evolution into what a post-pandemic version of the show might look like. The show switches up its 80s lockdown chic for a more generic, vaporwave-inspired aesthetic. The celebrity guests continue to be wide-ranging, including everyone from Ninja and Taraji P. Henson, corporate sibling talent like Wayne Brady, That Girl Lele, and Lincoln Loud, and even stars of Rivals content like Laura Marano, once of Disney Channel's Austin and Ally, and Stranger Things' Gaten Matarazzo, though he's no stranger to this conglomerate, as he appeared on a Season 10 episode of Ridiculousness on MTV back in 2017. The guessing panel was also mixed up for Season 2, turning into a rotating roster of mostly Nick and Nick-adjacent talent, including Side Hustle's Annie LeBlanc, Jaden Bartles, and Mitchell Berg, the astronauts Maya Sesh, and Ryan and Chingun from the moribund All That reboot. Unfiltered is a fun little show that showed how it could pivot, but despite its okay ratings, I'm not sure it'll have staying power once more regular series start filling the Nick schedule again. On the matter of strangeness, the reboot of Are You Afraid of the Dark managed to get a second season, turning this miniseries into an anthology. Season 2 is subtitled Curse of the Shadows and features a different cast uncovering seaside spookiness. Scary stuff isn't really my thing, so like with Season 1, this is a bit of an intentional blind spot in my coverage of Nick. However, a bigger oddity I can ask about this show is, why did Season 2 air in February? You'd think a show like this would be an October staple, but instead, Curse of the Shadows' 6 episodes ran between mid-February and mid-March, where football hubris and late-season snowfall are bigger fears than things that go bump in the night. It rated strongly for Nick regardless, though a little worse than Season 1, especially towards the middle. As much as I'm not one for rehashes, Are You Afraid of the Dark originally made its name on pushing where kids' TV could conceptually go, which is something I can't help but support. I'll be similarly brief, but for different reasons, about the continued existence of Nick's various fiddles. First fiddle, SpongeBob SquarePants, second fiddle, The Loud House, and third fiddle, heir apparent, The Casagrandes. SpongeBob remained mired in Season 12 for most of the year, entering Season 13 at last in November, with a scheduling order and airing pattern that was random and inconsistent enough to make more fervent fans of the show absolutely restless. Some of the episodes came out on DVD before they aired on Nick. The Loud House continued chugging through Season 5, including, at the end of the year, the show's 200th episode. And The Casagrandes crossed from Season 2 into Season 3 in 2021, but ratings for the Loud spin-off seemed to flag more noticeably than the two main fiddles, sliding into the 300,000s territory on average, and even the high 200,000s where the other two shows still touched 500,000 viewers or more fairly regularly. While big audiences are hard to come by in TV these days, the dip for The Casagrandes outpaced the slow sag of Nick's ratings average in general, and created a new gap in the stats between the three series for the first time, especially in the second half of the year. The Casagrandes hit a low of just 248,000 viewers for an episode in October. While that's not as low as a 238,000 rating for a December episode of The Loud House, that December Loud House episode is an outlier, given it aired at 9 PM in Nick at Night's airtime, and much of the rest of the season net numbers in the 4s and 5s. SpongeBob SquarePants' lowest premiere was a 339,000 viewer outing in April, almost another ballpark entirely in terms of ratings for Nick these days. While I set up The Casagrandes as a successor to the second fiddle position held by its parent show in last year's Year in Review, with numbers like this, it's hard to say whether it'll even be around to take up that mantle. Though a slumpy spin-off isn't the only action the Louds got this year, The family snagged 2 additional spin-off projects in 2021, which I'm sure excited the small percentage of the fanbase who are still rabid about Lincoln and his sisters, and somehow haven't yet settled into lukewarm complacency about the whole series by now. In August, The Loud House got a movie, albeit on Netflix, where it'll be forgotten about in a few weeks' time, as Nick continues to work their way through their ongoing content deal with the streaming service. The movie, a musical adventure in which the Louds discover their descent from Scottish royalty and presumably hijinks ensue, got a mildly warm reception from critics. Maybe about 60 degrees? Positive enough, but not glowing. More controversially, on Black Friday, November 26th, came A Loud House Christmas, which managed to stir notable emotion on a questionably built tale of forcing family togetherness by being the first ever live-action Loud House project. As uncanny as it looked, as unsupported as it was by some, the special racked up 881,000 total viewers, making it the most watched kids' entertainment broadcast of the year. This is the first time in a long time Disney Channel hasn't taken that crown, but I wish Nick won it under circumstances better than a dubious live-action spin-off of a creatively ailing animated franchise, seemingly levels upon levels removed from any hint of originality. A Loud House Christmas premiered both on Nick and Paramount+, and the conglomerate's vertically integrated streaming service had a few other things that were nominally of note to Nick viewers in 2021. First of those was a revival of the beloved hit sitcom iCarly, launched in June. 9 years is apparently long enough for executives now before they start considering a reboot. The rehash picks up basically as if we never left, as 20-something Carly Shay and her friends, minus Sam Puckett for reasons I won't get into, plus a few new faces, look to restart the web show that once made her famous, albeit in a very different online world than the one we said goodbye to in 2012. iCarly is a show that's very close to my heart, and for a certain generation of viewers, it has a special place in TV memory. As much as the heinous misconduct lurking inside Schneider's Bakery may try to besmirch it, and, more worryingly, maybe even further the notion that nothing good has come from Nick in a long time. I also tend to look pretty dimly on any sort of derivative rehash, reboot, revival, or otherwise, given I feel it's much harder to justify the creative expenditure, if not the financial one, over a new original product, especially at a time when funding and audiences are both at a premium. A return to a show like this has a lot to live up to, and translating what worked for the original to an audience who have changed massively over the past decade is no easy feat. Though speaking of derivative projects comes Star Trek Prodigy, the first kids TV entry into the sci-fi franchise Gene Roddenberry started. The journey of young aliens taking an abandoned Starfleet ship on a journey of their own started in October with an arrival on the main Nick channel in December. I'm probably not going to pay too much attention to this one myself, but I'm not sure how I feel just yet about Nick becoming a second run home for this show. It's something I'll have to keep an eye on in 2022. Nickelodeon in 2021 was a force to be reckoned with, bursting at the seams with new series and episodes all year long, even if not all the shows did great and the network did get bogged down with a few challenges along the way, and even if, admittedly, the channel's long-standing issues regarding scheduling and content treatment just weren't acknowledged, much less improved upon. 2021 on Nick represents the kind of flourishing TV channel I enjoy watching and supporting, one where it's obvious that there's continued, active investment on screen. Between 2020 and this very strong 2021, Nick's off to a good start for the new decade, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in 2022. If you want more analysis like this, then hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the annual retrospectives coming. You can support these videos further and get exclusive bonuses for as little as $3 a month at benchday.tk/join. You can see how Nick handled the wild and uncertain 2020 with grace and aplomb in this video, up here or down in the description. I'll see you next time.